Ever get that feeling like you're seeing the world through a lens you didn't even know you had? Today, we're diving into that
Yeah.
with the Unlearning Bias guide that you shared. And
Yes.
let me tell you, it's packed with those wait a minute moments that
Yeah.
make you question everything you thought you knew.
Yeah, it's true. This guide does not hold back.
Okay.
It throws you right into the deep end with a statement that's hard to ignore. We are all products of settler colonialism and white supremacy.
Whoa. Okay. Yeah, that definitely makes you stop and think,
Yeah.
okay, where are they going with this?
It's about recognizing those historical forces that shape our worldviews, often in ways we don't even realize.
Yeah, okay.
Think about it this way. Imagine growing up in a house with walls painted a certain color.
Mm-hmm.
You might not even notice the color anymore, it just is.
Right.
But it still influences how you see everything in the house.
Okay, I see what you mean.
Right.
So even if we don't actively choose these systems, settler colonialism, white supremacy,
Right.
they're still part of the backdrop of our lives.
Exactly. And just like that paint color,
Okay.
they influence our perceptions, our values, even our biases, without us always being aware of it.
So how do we even start to unpack something so deeply ingrained?
This guide argues that unlearning these biases is crucial for both personal and societal progress.
Okay.
It's about recognizing those subtle ways those systems show up in our everyday lives
Right.
and then actively working to dismantle them.
And that's where having a shared vocabulary comes in, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
The guide dives into definitions for terms like systemic oppression, racism, discrimination,
Yeah.
which it's a lot to process.
It is, and we'll unpack those terms more as we go.
Okay.
But one that really jumped out at me was microaggression.
Okay.
You know, those seemingly small comments or actions that can really sting,
Right.
even if they weren't intended to cause harm.
Right, like those backhanded compliments or jokes that make you feel othered or unseen.
Exactly.
The guide argues that these microaggressions, however subtle, contribute to a larger system of bias.
Right.
And to understand how, we need to look at the bigger picture.
Absolutely.
Okay.
It's about understanding the historical and societal context that gives these microaggressions their power.
Right.
They're not isolated incidents.
Mm-hmm.
They're part of a pattern.
Right.
Yeah. Think of it like this. Imagine a mosaic.
Okay.
Each individual piece might seem insignificant on its own, but together,
Yeah.
they create a larger image.
Okay.
Microaggressions.
Okay.
Those subtle forms of bias
Right.
are like those individual pieces.
Yeah.
They contribute to a bigger picture of exclusion and inequality.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
And this guide doesn't shy away from getting specific.
Right.
It dives into different forms of bias, from the subtle to the extreme, and gives examples for each.
And what's so powerful is that these examples aren't pulled out of thin air.
Right.
They're relatable scenarios that many of us have encountered in our own lives.
Absolutely. Like when it talks about colorism,
Right?
it contrasts something as seemingly commonplace as complimenting someone for being light-skinned
Yeah.
with the very real consequence of being denied a job because of your skin tone.
And it's not about saying that one is worse than the other.
Right.
It's about understanding how both of these actions, though existing on different ends of the spectrum,
Right.
feed into the same system of valuing certain skin tones over others.
It's eye-opening to think about these everyday occurrences through that lens.
Yeah.
Have you ever noticed how these subtle forms of bias, like microaggressions or even backhanded compliments,
Right.
can sometimes be harder to call out than more overt discrimination?
Absolutely. It's often easier to recognize and address blatant prejudice.
Right.
But these subtle forms of bias can be insidious because they often operate under the radar,
Right.
disguised as compliments or harmless jokes.
Right.
We might not even realize we're perpetuating them,
Right.
which is why unlearning them is so challenging.
And this is where that idea of internalized racism comes into play.
Seriously, the guide defines internalized racism as the acceptance and belief by members of stigmatized races of negative messages about their own abilities and intrinsic worth.
Wow.
It's like absorbing those negative messages from society
Right.
and then turning them inward, even if unconsciously.
So it's not just about recognizing external bias, it's
Yeah.
about examining our own internalized beliefs.
Precisely. And this guide doesn't stop at just defining these terms.
Right.
It connects them to a larger goal,
Okay.
decolonization.
Right, that word keeps popping up. But I have to admit, I'm still wrapping my head around what decolonization actually looks like in practice.
That's because decolonization is a process, not a destination.
Right.
It's about dismantling the systems of oppression that stem from colonialism and white supremacy.
So it's about dismantling those structures,
Yeah.
but also, like we were talking about earlier,
Right.
examining our own internalized biases.
Exactly. It's about both individual and collective transformation.
Yeah.
And it's not always easy or comfortable.
Right. And the guide gives examples of this, right? Like
Yes.
concrete ways we can start to decolonize our thinking and our actions.
Absolutely. And they range from small, everyday acts
Mhm.
to larger societal shifts.
Okay, so walk me through this. What does decolonization look like in our everyday lives?
Well, the guide gives this great example.
Mm.
Imagine actively diversifying your bookshelf.
Okay.
Instead of reaching for the same familiar authors,
Yeah.
you consciously seek out voices from marginalized communities. That's an act of decolonization.
So it's about challenging our own assumptions about whose stories are worth telling.
Yes. And it extends beyond just books.
Okay.
Think about the music you listen to,
Right.
the art you consume,
Right.
the news sources you trust.
Okay.
Are you engaging with a diversity of perspectives, or are you mainly reinforcing existing power structures?
I see what you mean. It's about being mindful of the choices we make
Right.
and how those choices either perpetuate old systems or help to build something new.
Exactly. And on a larger scale, the guide talks about things like advocating for the return of stolen land to indigenous communities,
Okay.
or pushing for changes to school curriculums to reflect a more inclusive and accurate version of history.
Those are big systemic shifts.
Yeah.
But you're right, it shows how decolonization exists on a spectrum. It's both the personal and the political. It's challenging our own biases and working to dismantle the systems that perpetuate those biases.
And that's where the guide's call to action comes in.
Okay.
Like save, share, unlearn, relearn. It's about taking what we're learning and putting it into practice.
I love that it's a reminder that unlearning bias isn't about being perfect. It's about being open to constantly learning, unlearning, and relearning.
Yeah.
It's a lifelong journey.
And it's a journey we don't have to take alone.
Why?
Talking about these issues, asking questions, and having open conversations.
Right.
Those are all acts of decolonization, too.
That's such an important point. We can all be part of this conversation, regardless of where we are on our own journeys.
Absolutely. This guide provides a framework for understanding bias, but it's up to each of us to take that knowledge and figure out how we can apply it in our own lives.
So to our listener out there, here's something to chew on. What resonated with you most in this conversation? And how can you apply these concepts, these aha moments, to challenge bias in your own corner of the world?
It's a question worth pondering, and there's no one right answer.
Right.
But the important thing is to keep asking questions,
Yeah.
keep learning, and keep pushing for progress.
Beautifully said. Thank you for diving into this important topic with me today.
Thank you.
And to you, our listener, thank you for sharing this incredible guide with us.
Yeah.
We'd love to hear your reflections, so feel free to reach out on social media and let us know what you're thinking.
Yeah, absolutely.
Till next time, keep those brains buzzing.
Yeah, take care.